one thing that's kind of interesting, again, why we spend time to meditate, to get silent, um, is taking time to learn how to listen. In this day and age, there's a lot of people talking, but not a lot of people listening. Like, too much talking. There's a reason why we have one mouth and two ears. I think you've heard that before. So, um, a lot of people like striving for relevancy, talk, 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 attention, 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 but not much listening, not much being, not much just being still, taking stock of things, taking time to get the big picture, taking things in, observing, sensing, allowing the intuition inside of you to strengthen. I think that's what I mentioned also and touched upon yesterday, that when I teach, when we sit down for these talks, I have no agenda for you to believe anything. It's all going to be inside of yourself. Just look there. Start to trust your inner guidance. That's the real beauty of this work. And that's where true confidence comes from. And even when we talked about like kind of the yoga scene, like people wanting 200-hour, 500-hour, it's Krishnamacharya wasn't certified. I mean, like he, he was thirsty for the knowledge and the experience and the practice, the sadhana, and the body work was there, living and breathing in his own body and heart. That's money can't buy that. Piece of paper cannot validate that. So, you start to realize, yeah, like, not that I'm not saying it's bad to maybe work towards certain things, but again, it's always the body of work, the experience that will give so much more. Some other stuff is just showing off, like, oh, I have this accreditation, I have this, I have that, I have this degree. But even when people have certain degrees, they're not all created equal. And through their experience and how they've utilized what they've learned too. That's a whole other thing. So one thing that I've learned like on this path is like there's a lot of noise, even in the yoga scene. There's a lot of noise. And just navigating all of that with a sensibility and a groundedness, it takes time sometimes. And sometimes you try, you dip your toe into some things and you're like, whoa, that's not quite feeling on track for me. You dip your toe, you try to stay open, but then also at the same time have a healthy boundary around yourself. I mean, I've been in some scenes where you start to feel like people don't like you because you think for yourself. You know what I mean? You're not always going with the crowd and like, the mainstream narrative or the mainstream this, and you just kind of say, it's not that you have to be argumentative with people, but you just learn to just think for yourself. And that's actually what I really appreciate when I work with people who come and practice with me. You think for yourself, like get grounded, get centered, get clear, think for yourself, question things, but also be courageous enough to apply some of these principles and see what comes up for you. Because sometimes people will write things off, but they don't even try. They don't even enter into the fire. They don't even go into the arena. I've had some people that they discredit certain things, even like going to Mysore, but they haven't even entered into the arena to try it out and to actually follow through with it and to go through some of the things. A lot of times people leave spaces and all they've done afterwards through their dialogue, it's just their projection because certain demons came up within them and then they weren't willing to like explore that. There's no one to blame. There's no one to blame. And the hard truth for these practices is that we have to look ourselves in the mirror and just have an honest conversation for once. That's what it is. And I have to do that too. And it's not always comfortable. And sometimes it's like, oh, how did I get here? Like sometimes you're doing things and then you're like, you have to question yourself, like, how did I get here? Well, I can blame a whole bunch of people, but it's my responsibility. It's me. too. I had a play in all of this. Um, and those, being on the yoga path or on the conscious path, there's a lot of humbling moments, a lot of humbling moments. But at the same time, we start to find an inner resolve and an inner strength that no one outside of you can validate. And the other thing is like, this is like kind of the hard truth sometimes is no one is going to save you. Like, it's like you have to, like, I'm talking about those really deep patterns, those deep, like, sure, if there's a fire, hopefully somebody could come and help me. But, like, what I mean is like, I'm just talking about like internally, right? No one's coming to save you. Um, and that can be good news or it can be bad news. It just depends on how you look at it. Just depends on how you want to proceed moving forward. And I mean, I've got caught up in that too. Like it's very easy to blame or to point the finger in another direction. And like I mentioned before, even in the yoga scene, there can be a lot of noise. Like a lot of people want to say, oh, well, this tradition isn't good or this isn't good, but I know the right way. Like, well, what gave you the authority to know the right way? Do you know? Like, that's why in this day and age, you have to really discern, you have to go into spaces really with a discerning type of awareness. And so part of meditation in the yoga practice is learning how to block out the noise. We're getting bombarded with so much information nowadays, like so much like comes at us. And that's why it's so important to be still within yourself. Again, I always repeat myself, that groundedness, that finding that center within yourself. Because the outer world loves to dictate this sense of divided thinking, like as if everything is just completely black and white, that there's no gray area to things. It's right or wrong. You're either with me or you're against me. But we've come accustomed to not being sophisticated enough to one, listen, and two, to really have like a debate where we don't have to like always vie for our own position to be right. Like, can we just understand something? Can we understand another side to things? Maybe it won't be our way, but can you just take a moment to understand, oh, okay, like I understand a little bit about this and that and your way of thinking. It may not completely jive with you, but this is maturity. This is maturity. And I've also learned like maturity doesn't always come with age either. I've been around some people that are older than me. They're so rigid in their thinking and like no open-mindedness at all, like no willing to, understand another side to things. And then I've met some people who are much younger than me that are very wise, very mature. And then, the more I deepen my yoga practice, the more I start to understand there's a maturity to the soul, like that doesn't connect to the age of someone. It's kind of like how they've utilized their time in this reality. Have we been spinning our wheels or have we been utilizing our time with awareness and consciousness and learning and understanding and growing? So that's something else. So some people just think just being in the proximity of a place makes them into a yogi. Well, I'm close to the master teacher and like I text them on WhatsApp. That doesn't mean that you've done the work. It doesn't mean you've done the work. Oh, I've had coffee with them. Like, no. Oh, I'm certified. No, it doesn't mean you've done the work necessarily. Not fully. Not in the unseen places. So, like a lot of people, they're vying for the 200 or the 500 or the piece of paper, but it doesn't always mean that it's fully germinated. So, even I can throw myself into the arena in the fact that, yeah, like certain things have been accomplished, but I also know like the one thing I appreciate about showing up to the practice on a daily basis, I can see my weak spots too. Like whether that's mentally and or like you it's like it kind of stares you in the face and you're kind of like, okay, like I know I have so much more work to do. But I'm also proud of myself too, of being able to develop in certain areas of my life. So it's not like it has to be heavy and morose, and it's not like I'm trying to create more suffering for myself and to downgrade myself. But there is something about, you know, sitting with yourself in the practice and really like looking at yourself honestly and kind of, definitely being proud of what's come to this point, but at the same time, just knowing, oh, there's still more I need to enter into. There's still more that I need to work through. Because we start to see our patterns, we start to see our conditioning, you know, some of the negative thinking, self-talk, the projections, all these types of things. That's why oftentimes I feel like a marker of a yogi is more the transparency. And through that transparency, you become luminous. You start to shine more light uh, because you've gone through a lot of the processes. You've worked through all of that. It has nothing to do with, oh, I've adopted this diet. Oh, I've meditated. I meditate for an hour every day. Like even a lot of times, the people who advertise what they do, that doesn't mean anything. Like I don't. Some people can do a really sincere like, and they don't have to tell anybody about it for one, but they can do a very deep 10-minute meditation, and that might be just what's needed. Like it's quality over quantity. So it's like, you know, sometimes people just think just advertising, oh, I've done this, I've done this, I've done that. It's just a lot of, it's just a lot of doing. But it isn't always culminating into really being it, embodying it. Are you embodying it? Are you the example of it? But that's not done through a lot of words. It's not done through a lot of word salad. Like sometimes I've read things, I'm like, what are you saying? Like it's like, oh, like what are you saying? Or even like when you hear this talk, it can be a little bit of a distraction. So when you're centered within yourself, you'll discern like, oh yeah, this is hitting home for me. Or you'll be like, this is not really, I appreciate your effort, but it's not hitting home for me. And it doesn't have to be about judgment, but you'll really start to sense what is right, what is true for you, and what isn't. And sometimes it takes courage to step into that through your true listening and being. And it may go counter to what most people are doing, or the mainstream, or what your inner circle tells you. Hopefully, as you proceed in this work consciously, your inner circle could potentially change, though. Not that you have to discount anyone and judge them but it just, sometimes I even noticed through different stages of my life, it just was a natural falling away. It wasn't even like an argument or anything. It was just like a natural, kind of like how a snake like sloughs off its skin. It just, just comes off. So the other thing that's always so interesting, and I mean, I'm speaking of people who I felt really embodied this example. I'm not necessarily saying it's about me, but usually people who really go deep into this conscious work, they never feel that they're better than anyone either. Oh, because I'm doing my yoga and my meditation and like, I only eat like, this type of food and like, I can't like, I can't sit at these tables. You know, I've learned that people that are really of a high level, they can break bread with anybody. They can have a conversation with anybody and they can find some type of connecting point. It's not that you have to belabor a toxic environment and just like suffer through that. Because also, when you start to learn more about yourself, you know how to also leave situations that are not healthy for you. But I also mean just innocent people that may be on a totally different track than you. You can break bread with them. Any culture, any race, any religion, any status, it doesn't matter because you see the humanness in them. You see the soul, not just the external exterior that we're so entranced by. That's why even in the yoga scene, like we get entranced by all this, like I've done this and I've done that. And I'm like, it's just like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I've met people like, I'm going here, I'm going to Burning Man, I'm going to Bali, I'm going to like Rishikesh, I'm going here, and then it's like, then you realize that there's not much happening except just going here, here, and here, like, which some people can be doing that and be doing the work. So I'm not saying like, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but sometimes we can get more into the scene of things or potentially just, being a part of something. And maybe we even, realize, oh, this might not be the most healthy thing for me. So, um, again, this is where these practices are guiding us to see more clearly, to listen more clearly, to feel more fully. That's why I often will say to have better eyes to see, better ears to hear. Because sometimes we're, myself included, sometimes we live a little bit in a fog. We're not quite fully brave enough to awaken and like to want to see things, from a different angle because we've gotten comfortable with maybe a certain type of thinking or wanting to be accepted, by certain, people or whatnot. So, even, I remember one of my favorite authors was Carolyn Mass. She wrote this book, Anatomy of the Spirit, which is like a very classic, like book on like chakras. But I remember hearing a talk from her, like, she had written about like energy. She was like a medical intuitive too. Like she had a natural ability to kind of see someone's energy and kind of she could forecast like maybe what physical ailments you would have in the future because of like different energetic discords that she could see in your energy body. But Anatomy of the Spirit, her name's Carolyn Mass. But I was just hearing a podcast from her. This was years ago, but she's kind of she can be a little bit harsh in a good way, but she was saying how like she was admitting that I did all this work and then I hit up like I think almost she was like at this time like 50 and she said I realized I hadn't really done it. Like for her to admit that was like quite brave. Like I hadn't really done the work as much as I could. And then she kind of like, shifted some things. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the retreat, and also something that the Ashtanga yoga practice helps us with is, facing what is hard upfront so it gets easier. Instead of keeping, like, oh, I need to cut corners and this and that. And like, let me just like go this way just to avoid any conflict, to avoid any type of confrontation, to avoid any type of discomfort. And then it just gets harder and harder because you know what you get good at? Running. And running makes you tired. Running makes you tired. So, like, it's always that paradox. It's so interesting. Like we kind of think we're saving ourselves, but in the end, we get really tired. And then it makes us weak. because we don't want to confront what is challenging. And then we diminish ourselves from having the skills to actually navigate that with ease. That's why people go to the gym and lift weights. It's hard. It's hard at first. It's hard at first. It's heavy, but then it gets lighter, right? And that's how we get stronger. And then we add more weight. It's heavy, and then it gets lighter, and we get stronger. I mean, it's the same with everything. It's the same with everything. That's how we build the skills. I'm not I'm not saying that we have to carry a heavy load on our backs all day and like, make life heavy. That's not what I'm saying, but sometimes we rob ourselves from the skill set. I mean, I've mentioned this before in the past, like, I mean, I was, I grew up with this concept where people would say, don't ever talk about race, religion, money, and politics. Am I missing another one? Like you grow up talking about, like they tell you don't talk about it, but then if we don't talk about it, we don't become skillful in talking about it. I'm not saying that we have to run after people and say, hey, we need to talk about this right now. It's like, and then you have to be argumentative. That's not what I mean. But then to tell people to avoid these conversations makes us devoid of the skills and the maturity to have them in a sophisticated way where we can listen and debate and maybe come to some conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion will be we can agree to disagree. And sometimes the conclusion is like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm learning something. Oh, I kind of agree with that point of view. It's just like, but just to avoid certain conversations, it's not healthy. The way that I interpret some of the yoga philosophy, it's not going to be always through like the terminology and everything. I mean, there's so many books that you can like read about that. I like to interpret it more in a way that, how we interact in life, how we see things, to really make it truly simple, that it doesn't have to be this complex, absurd language where it feels a little bit elusive, not easy to understand. It might sound sophisticated, but it could be a distraction. Because is it giving you something tangible to work with? And this type of work is about tangibility. It's all in your grasp. It's not out of your grasp. It's all within your reach. It's within you, actually. So, and when anyone claims that you have to go through them to get through the real stuff, that already that's a bad sign. Well, hopefully that's a bad sign. And that's something that I used to say is the yoga practice makes you the best you, and that is what the world needs. You don't need to be somebody else. You don't need to be a carbon copy of me or somebody else, or you need to be the best you, and that's what the world needs. That's why you're here. And that's what's going to heal this world. I don't know if he would even call himself a philosophy teacher, but I've been listening to a lot of his discourse, this Kapil Gupta. But he was saying that one of the main things he looks for in a student is sincerity, that true sincerity, and when you look up, and it was funny because I know what sincerity means, but when I looked it up in the dictionary, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that is so interesting. Like sincerity, it's like you're coming with truth, with transparency, with it's not an ambition. It's just like that real desire, to delve into the path, into the philosophy, into the learning, into the teaching. Not vying for something to acquire something. And that's another thing. Like, I mean, I've been in the yoga scene for a long time. I always know it's a bad sign when it's always, when everything is so transactional, Um, there's some people I've known in the scene, like anytime that they send me a message, it's because they want something. Not connection, not like friendship. They just want something. And that's I don't even answer anymore. I'm not interested anymore. And sometimes I feel a little bit naive too, because I'm just kind of like, there's been times I've gone into spaces like people that are colleagues, and I don't want to shout out. I don't want you to elevate my position. I just looking for like a friend. Do you know what I mean? Like just a friend. No, because then you start to realize that people just want a stepping stone, you know? It's like, it kind of left me a little bit like, that's not so fun. It's jealous. Well, I don't know if it's only that, but sometimes it's also transactional. Like things have turned into transactions now instead of just like, let's just like compare notes. Do you know? Like let's just compare notes and let's just, yeah. Um, like sometimes I find it interesting that some are not so into collaboration, but more into dominance. Do you know? I want to dominate this space instead of actually truly collaborate. And collaboration is so fun. I mean, I remember like one time when I was working on this project, one of the producers said something really nice, which I don't know where she took it from, but she said, when the tide comes in, all ships rise. Like not everyone takes that attitude anymore. Like people are like, I want to put a dam around it. So like you don't get the tide, I'm gonna get it only. It's like, come on. Like all the ships are here, the tide just comes in, we can all rise together, no big deal. Um, it is true though, like some of us will have garnered more experience um than others. However, we're all at the end of the day, we're all created equal. We all play different roles. And I like that analogy of like a chess game. So we all play these different roles as different pieces, and then everyone goes into the same box once the game is over. Sometimes when you do have the space, I mean, it's not always like that because, sometimes we're more awake than other times. But, there's, when it comes to relationships with people, sometimes I've had to distinguish like, do I feel like creating more karma with this person? Like, no. Okay, let me just let me backtrack out of here or how do I want to proceed here? Do I want to create more karma or do I want to unwind it? Like some battles just don't really need to be fought, or it doesn't like we don't need to, create more strife. We need to um, try to find some type of resolution. And that's a thing that sometimes we have to acknowledge too, is sometimes there's an addiction to that conflict and chaos. It can be a little bit of an addiction too, which is also a distraction not to have to look at yourself. I mean, I remember one time this friend was admitting to me, she practiced yoga and everything, but she was always like kind of always running late, always like running a little bit behind, kind of always busy, busy, busy. And, and she kind of she saw the pattern of, busy, 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 running behind. And she finally took the time to like plan ahead, leave the house early, to get to work. And then she got really emotional because she finally had a moment to truly feel, even though it could be that simple, because in a way that busy, busy, busyness was stopping her from really feeling in a moment, just having a free moment to feel. That is one reason why we start to feel lighter when we process these emotions and we allow them to release. So it feels like a storm is coming and it doesn't always feel comfortable. But that is why That's how I actually see enlightenment, is that you've processed everything. Everything is all the suppressed and repressed stuff, the conditioning has been released, and you do feel light.